Statement.
OMB requested changes which I felt completely negated the testimony.
At the time, the Hansen testimony was seen by the Office of Management and Budget as inconsistent with administration policy.
The result was this exchange with Senator Gore.
But why do you directly contradict yourself in the testimony you're giving about this scientific question?
The last paragraph in that section was not a paragraph which I wrote. That was added to my testimony in the process of review by OMB.
What he said at the time was quite open. Publicly, he said, I did not prepare that particular paragraph.
Right.
And do you remember what you said?
I asked him who made him change it, and then expressed my view that I thought that was improper. Censorship. If they force you to change a scientific conclusion, it's a form of science fraud by them. You know, in the Soviet Union, they used to have a tradition of ordering their scientists to change their studies to conform with the ideology then acceptable to the state.
You went so far in that hearing as to accuse the Bush administration of Soviet-style repression. And it's precisely the kind of reaction that makes a lot of people in industry in America really nervous about a President Gore.
They'll have to decide for themselves how they feel about me. But in a congressional hearing, when a witness on an issue like this is ordered to change his scientific opinion, that's not a light matter.
The Hansen controversy set the stage for a 4-year struggle between Gore and the Bush administration. Senator Gore wanted to limit greenhouse gas emissions from American industry. The Bush administration did not.
The arguments against it were essentially political at the time. You have to recall that that was a period when we were still in recession, at least thought to be, and there were deep economic anxieties in the country. That made it very difficult to do anything significant with respect to reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
Rio de Janeiro, June 1992. The nations of the world gathered here to solve the problem of global warming. This was the very first Earth Summit. The overwhelming majority of nations favored mandatory limits on industrial greenhouse gas emissions. The Bush administration did not.
Let's face it, there has been some criticism of the United States.
President Bush held out until those limits were made voluntary, and he prevailed. It was a major defeat for Gore.
Nobody should be fooled about what he is doing at Rio. This is a photo opportunity.
2 months later, when Bill Clinton named Gore his vice presidential running mate, Mr. Bush thought he had an easy target.
This guy is so far off in the environmental extreme, we'll be up to our neck in owls and out of work for every American. This guy's crazy. He is way out, far out, man.
This time, the criticism didn't stick. And the Clinton-Gore victory offered Gore a powerful platform from which he resumed his crusade against global warming.
Reducing greenhouse gas. Are changing the long-term climate. More of the sun's. We have a crisis, all right. Every mountain glacier on every continent is receding rapidly.
But the vice president had a big fight on his hands. Al Gore versus the fossil fuel industry when we come back.
Peter Jennings reporting. The Apocalypse and Al Gore will continue in a moment. The Apocalypse and Al Gore continues.
By last October, the vice president still had not persuaded the American public that a crisis was at hand. It was time to apply a little imagination.
It's the Clinton White House view that there'd be fewer weather catastrophes in the future if
the climate discussions in Washington for the past day and a half have been fact-finding.
They brought us down to the White House, and it was really quite a show, and it was a big thrill.
The White House enlisted the one group it believed the public would listen to, the TV weathermen and women. Gore, ever the scientist, lectured on the finer points of climate change.
The redistribution of heat from the equator to the poles through wind currents and ocean currents and cloud systems, it defines the overall long-term pattern.
When charm was needed, Gore turned to the president.
The president himself came by and joked that he might become a weatherman.
You know, I have to leave this job after 3 years, and I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm too young to retire, and I'm used to delivering bad news.
But behind the charm was a carefully calculated goal.
We have to say there's a challenge out there, we have to respond to it, and then we have to get after it. But we can't do it until we build the awareness of the American people.
Here was the President of the United States preaching the gospel of global warming, Gore's greatest achievement.
I can now pass Al Gore's climate test.
And they rolled out the big guns to be sure that we got the message, that they want to get the message out. What-time radar this morning?
Miami meteorologist Brian Norcross took the White House message back to his viewers in South Florida, where he believes the impacts of global warming could be devastating.
This place is all about climate. You know, nobody would have ever come here to live if it hadn't been for the climate.
4 million people live in South Florida, many of them within a mile of the coast. The estimated value of the property here is $2 trillion. Most of the property is barely above sea level.
Much of this city is sea level dependent, and you see the projections of a rising sea level, which is happening. The sea level has risen significantly here since the beginning of this city, and if it continues to happen or it accelerates, it would make a dramatic difference in where you can live.
We're really on a collision course, and nowhere is it more clearly seen in the state of Florida.
Dr. Steve Leatherman says that global warming could cause the seas to rise another 2 feet over the next 100 years.
If you look at some of the more popular resorts like Miami Beach, well, by the time you get another foot of sea level, that beach will be gone.
And it goes beyond the beaches. Florida has spent billions of dollars constructing an elaborate network of barriers to protect its fresh water supplies inland from the seawater of the Atlantic Ocean. But as the sea level rises, salt water threatens to spill over these barriers and contaminate the state's coastal water reserves.
If those barriers were removed, salt water would move up those canals and gradually permeate the ground around them and move in the direction of those well fields, and there wouldn't be a fresh water supply on the coast.
There's no question that rising sea level is a threat, but I fear stronger hurricanes.
Brian Norcross knows how destructive hurricanes can be. This was Hurricane Andrew, August 24th, 1992. Average wind speed 145 miles per hour. And this is what Andrew did to the community of Homestead, Florida.
The people would walk a block away and get lost getting back to their home. It was such a different place. Many people opened their closet door and found that their house had been destroyed all around them.
The final bill, more than $16 billion.
It looked like a nuclear bomb had gone off.
Brian Norcross believes that even a slight increase in temperature due to global warming could spell trouble.
The average temperature in Miami in the summertime is 90. That's our average high here. If it were to go to 92, which can increase the water temperature near the coast by a couple of degrees, and that could very well, slightly increased water temperatures increase the strength of hurricanes, provide more energy into hurricanes.
What you heard from the Miami weatherman, as plausible as it sounds, is not yet certain. While most scientists do agree that the Earth is getting warmer, no scientist can say precisely how this warming will change the weather we experience, including hurricanes. What scientists fear, and what Al Gore says he fears most, is how unstable the global climate has become in the last several years. July 1995, a deadly heat wave hit the city of Chicago. Single-family brick homes literally turned into ovens when evening temperatures hovered near their daytime highs of 100 degrees. 522 people died. Nothing like this had ever happened here. In October of 1996, the worst fires in 30 years devoured 6 million acres of the southwestern United States. Later in July, it was floods in Eastern Europe. More than 100 people lost their lives. And in August of last year, Typhoon Winnie ravaged the Chinese coast near Shanghai and forced more than 1 million Chinese to evacuate.
We're talking about potentially huge numbers, millions of environmental refugees being generated
Many scientists fear that global warming will cause these record-breaking disasters to become more frequent and even more extreme. However, scientists cannot say yet with certainty that any single weather disaster is, in fact, caused by global warming.
What we have to recognize is uncertainties can go in two directions. We may be overestimating the magnitude of climate change due to human activities, or we may be underestimating it.
Vice President Gore's critics exploit this scientific uncertainty.
Scientists have said that we do not understand the climate system that well. We don't understand the role of oceans, water vapor, and clouds, and that to really make these long-term projections, we need to have a better understanding of the system.
Bill O'Keefe is a lobbyist for a coalition of oil, coal, and car companies. They call themselves the Global Climate Coalition, but they are some of the largest producers of greenhouse gases.
Why do you think it is that the industries most responsible for global warming are the most skeptical about the science of it?
Well, first of all, that presumes that industries are causing global warming. Carbon dioxide comes from people exhaling, from decaying plants. It comes from a number of natural sources.
Are you suggesting that the climate change is affected by plants rotting and us breathing?
Well, the accumulation of greenhouse gases are a result of a number of activities. Human activities, which include burning fossil fuels, account for a very small percentage.
What contribution do you think man is making to climate change?
Well, that is a debate. Scientists, climate scientists, atmospheric scientists, and meteorologists are still trying to determine the impact of human activities.
Members of O'Keefe's coalition have recruited their own scientists to study the issue.
I'll get to my grave and people, I'm convinced, will still be debating whether or not the buildup of the greenhouse gases has had much of an impact on global climate.
University of Arizona climatologist Robert Balling is the kind of scientist the fossil fuel industry likes to fund. And Balling concedes that some of his financial backers have an agenda.
Clearly, if you're in a coal company, what you decide to fund may be somewhat different than what the National Science Foundation decides to fund. And I think everyone's human. They understand that a coal company may pick a project because they think that project may provide a set of answers that the coal company would be happy with. But the coal company can't come to my laboratory and sit there and take the printouts and say, okay, pick this one, not this one.
Surely not. But the work of some industry-funded scientists is sometimes used to create what amounts to propaganda. Listen to this coal industry video, which claimed that a doubling of carbon dioxide is a good thing.
Crop plants will continue to grow more productively. Forests will extend their ranges. Grasses will grow where none grow now. And great tracts of barren land will be reclaimed.
Al Gore calls this junk science, reminiscent of the tobacco industry's effort to persuade Americans that cigarette smoking didn't cause lung cancer.
Having gone through these long debates with the tobacco industry, which remind me almost exactly of this debate, I think that it is totally fair and totally legitimate to say we're going through the same kind of experience again. Remember how wrong they were? Remember what their arguments sounded like? Now listen again to what these people are saying.
I think it's unfortunate that someone who holds the second highest office in this nation would make those kind of scandalous charges. He's impugning the integrity of a lot of scientists at a lot of at prestigious universities.
Your frequent use of the tobacco analogy infuriates the industry. You realize, of course, that you...
Now that's... I don't want to fence on the analogy. I think the analogy is exact.
But it is a way, isn't it, sir, that you have of demeaning your critics, particularly your industry critics?
My purpose is not to demean them. My purpose is to remind all of us that we've been through this kind of scientific argument before.
In an effort to separate the science from the politics, the United Nations organized 2,500 scientists from around the world to study the issue. We asked the chairman of that UN committee, Robert Watson, to summarize its conclusions.
There's absolutely no doubt that human activities are changing the composition of the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide, methane and nitrous oxide have all increased over the last 100 years and absolutely due to human activities. There's also no doubt that the Earth's temperature has also increased, about 0.6 degrees centigrade over the last decades. Glaciers have retreated worldwide, sea level has increased, and there's even been changes in precipitation patterns in North America.
Still, many people are not convinced. This is Smith Island near the eastern shore of Maryland. The people here have come to depend upon the Chesapeake Bay for survival. But people who now live off the water used to live off the land. Trouble is, most of the land is now under the water.
I just think over the years, you know, that steady water just washing in and washing in, it just eats our island away. And this island is much smaller than I remember it as a girl.
What's happening here, as you can see, is just the seas just steady 24 hours a day pounding in here.
Jesse Marsh is a seventh-generation resident of Smith Island. The steady encroachment of the rising water threatens to destroy even the memory of life here.
This is one of the headstones. There are about 14 graves up and down this shore here. Margaret Jones, and I actually know her people. Her people still live right up here in town.
On Smith Island, we find two of the most certain effects of global warming. One, the sea level is rising, in this case causing Smith Island to drown. And two, the residents here, like most Americans, refuse to believe that global warming is the problem.
The global warming doesn't seem to be a fear with the people living here now. I think some of them think we might not be here a whole lot longer, but in their lifetime, they don't think it's going to be affected that much.
I don't think they believe in global warming, is what I'm saying. I just don't think they believe in it.
This kind of indifference drives Gore crazy and is why many people think the United States will never solve the problem of global warming. Influenced by industry, or perhaps just resistant to change, Americans are reluctant to confront an environmental problem when no one can tell them precisely how or when disaster will strike. This is the town of Shadyside, Ohio, along the Ohio River. The residents here have come to know the kind of extreme weather that might come with global warming. January 1996, unusually warm winter temperatures melt the snowpack of western Pennsylvania, transforming the Ohio River into a sea of icy water. 6 years earlier, the flood came at night. Torrential summer rains near Wheeling, West Virginia, sent a wall of water barreling downstream toward Shadyside.
The water wiped out everything in its path. There was several people lost their lives. It was very devastating.
Yeah, there were whole families, some cases wiped out. That's a very, very emotional item in the community.
But even with this, what scares the people of Shadyside more than unpredictable weather is Al Gore's campaign to end global warming. This is coal country, and most of the people here depend on the mines for work. These days, when the miners of Shadyside go underground, the conversation invariably turns to the impact of Al Gore's crusade on America's struggling coal industry.
Global warming is definitely a threat to our livelihoods.
80% of all the mining industry in this country will be shut down.
The economic, financial, social impact can't be measured.
The residents of Shadyside believe the coal industry will have to be shut down in order to stop global warming. The burning of coal is one of the largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. And union miners worry that they have nowhere else to go.
The average union miner today is 49 years old with 19 years experience. Well, that makes him a damn good coal miner, but that gives him a little hope of going anywhere else and starting another career.
50% of our electricity comes from coal. Every single coal miner we have talked to thinks that you're responsible for their potential job loss. How do you explain it to them?
Well, I don't think all those jobs are going to be lost, but there's no doubt that if there is some diminishing demand for coal, that'll have an impact in that sector.
What we have is a deliberate attempt by the Clinton and Gore administration to eliminate everything that you've worked a lifetime for.
At this mine workers meeting in Shadyside, the issue is job security. But the speaker isn't a union man. This is Robert Murray, the owner of the mine. Threatened by Gore's crusade against global warming, the mine owners and the miners have put aside a century of bitter conflict to fight what they think is a common enemy.
It is obvious that President Clinton and Vice President Gore are going to use the environment as a political issue to get Mr. Gore elected President of the United States in 2000. So while it may be an environmental issue and a jobs issue to you, it's also being used as a political platform by these two individuals.
Global warming's hot on the is a hot topic, so let's make that the issue.
There's definitely a political agenda to this.
The miners we talk to believe that your attack, as they see it, on the coal industry is a cynical political move by you to secure your environmental credentials for a presidential campaign. What would you say to such a remark?
Well, boy, if I was motivated by political calculation on this, I would probably never have gotten involved with it in the first place. And they can believe that or not as they choose. I'm going to keep on saying and doing what I think is the right thing about this. I think that it is a very critical issue for the future of our country and for the future of our world.
But the miners feel that a politically ambitious vice president has betrayed them. After all, it was they who helped Al Gore and Bill Clinton win the state of Ohio in 1992 and again in 1996. When the Clinton-Gore bus tour passed through coal country, the miners cheered them on.
And we waved and the bus went by and they went on to win the election. This time, have the bus stop.
I can see where all working people, the concern with jobs, would be actively campaigning opposing this global warming issue. It's a struggle between life and death.
And this life and death struggle, as they see it, may be the only thing the miners have in common with the owners of the fossil fuel industry. But last year, the two joined forces to try to derail Gore's effort. After 5 years of casting doubt on the science, this odd coalition shifted its public relations campaign to what they insist emission cuts will do to the American economy.
What do you know about the United Nations proposed climate treaty?
Isn't that about global warming?
Their ad does not say what this will cost them. It focuses instead on what they say it'll cost you.
This could go up by 50 cents a gallon. Heating and electricity prices could soar, and higher energy costs will raise the price of almost everything we buy.
Every time I turn on television these days, I see an ad from industry saying all this stuff you're promoting, we don't need to do. Are they telling us the truth?
No, I don't think they are. I don't think they are. I don't want to get into their internal motives. I think they're trying to win a battle of public opinion.
Bill O'Keefe's Global Climate Coalition was one of the sponsors of the ad.
Are you saying that it cannot be done? It cannot reduce greenhouse gases without adding 50 cents a gallon to gasoline?
What I'm saying is, in this country, we will have to, if that's implemented, we'll have to reduce energy use by about 30% or close to a third in about 12 years. Over that short period of time, no one can tell you how to make that kind of reduction without doing serious damage to our economy.
Every time in our history we've tried to clean up pollution, the doomsayers have said this is going to cause an economic catastrophe. And every time they've been wrong.
Are you saying precisely, sir, that you can solve the problem of global warming without increasing the price of gasoline?
Yes, I think we can.
And what about utility bills?
I think that utility bills can come down and will come down. Right now, Peter, 2/3 of all the energy that we burn to produce electricity is completely wasted. It's turned into pollution, not useful energy. With competition and new technologies, that's going to change.
Ladies and gentlemen, the new Dodge...
These days, as proof, Al Gore, the techno-optimist, points to the big three American car makers and the Japanese, who recently unveiled cars that can get up to 80 miles to the gallon with fewer emissions. But even if this new technology enables the industrialized world to eventually reduce its emissions, that will not be enough. Global warming demands a global solution. And this is where Gore made a series of errors. Kyoto, Japan, December 1997, the ultimate test of Al Gore's crusade. Representatives from nearly every country in the world got together again to try to reach an agreement on limiting the world's greenhouse gas emissions. Many people thought the Kyoto conference was doomed from the outset, because back in 1995, early in the negotiations, the United States had agreed 134 developing nations, including China and Mexico, would be exempt from the treaty. The vice president had approved that fateful decision.
Back in 1995, you basically said to them they didn't have to make such a commitment. How did you get yourselves in this box?
There's always been a recognition around the world that the countries with very few resources and an extremely low standard of living are not going to be asked to bear the same challenges that some of the countries that have more assets are going to face. But we signaled back then, look, the time's going to come when you all have to be a part of this, because we can't solve it unless the developing countries are involved.
But Gore made a political miscalculation. By allowing the developing world off the hook even temporarily, Gore gave the fossil fuel industry an irresistible public relations opportunity. It could now attack the fairness of the proposed climate treaty, and it did.
But their global agreement isn't global. 134 of 168 countries are exempt.
The argument worked.
Mr. Johnson, aye. Mr. Akaka.
Last summer, the U.S. Senate, which must ultimately ratify any treaty, voted unanimously to not even consider a treaty, which excludes the developing nations.
West Virginia, the ayes are 95, and the nays are 0.
Senator Chuck Hagel of Nebraska sponsored the resolution.
It is the developing nations that will be the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases during the next 25 years. It is complete folly to exclude them from legally binding emission mandates. How could any treaty aimed at reducing global emissions of greenhouse gases be at all effective when it excludes these 130 nations?
The Senate resolution was a decisive blow to Gore, and it forced the White House to change its position. Last October, the Vice President and the President announced that the United States would now insist that the developing world participate.
The industrialized world must lead, but developing countries also must be engaged. The United States will not assume binding obligations unless key developing nations meaningfully participate in this effort.
Why'd you change your mind?
Because the numbers show that the increasing pollution levels in the developing countries are such that they have to be involved sooner rather than in the distant long term.
Or to put it another way, if I may be presumptuous, that the U.S. Senate got ahead of you on this issue and said if you didn't get a commitment from these nations, you weren't going to have any ratification for a global
Well, that
warming
was
treaty.
a factor, sure. Yeah, I'll acknowledge that was a factor.
And last December, when negotiations stalled, Gore made an emergency trip to Japan, trying to persuade the developing world to participate.
Success will require first and foremost that we heal the divisions among us.
To push China particularly. The Chinese claimed the United States did not understand the developing world's predicament.
The U.S. government doesn't understand just how deeply ingrained are Chinese fears of going back to hard-scrabbled, dirt-poor ways of living.
Energy expert Bill Chandler works closely with the Chinese.
I think it's fair to ask China to do something, because if China does nothing, climate change will surely be disastrous. But how we ask them, what we ask them, is really the key. If we say to China, you have to limit your economic growth, you have to sacrifice, then the Chinese will say, well, you Americans use 10 times as much as we do. You do something first. You created this problem, you solve it.
And led by China, that is exactly the position the developing countries took in Kyoto. Eager to secure a treaty, even a flawed treaty, Clinton and Gore caved in. The Senate reaction was predictable.
Any way you measure this, this is a very bad deal for America. And I can tell you now, there is no way, if the president signs this, that this is brought to the United States Senate, it'll even be close.
You went to Kyoto pledging to get the developing nations to make some meaningful commitment to reduce the greenhouse gases, and you failed.
Not entirely, no. We got 3/4 of a loaf, and we got the ability to get the rest of it.
But you don't want me to believe that you were successful in Kyoto, do you?
Oh, yes, I think it was a huge success for our country and for the world.
At best, it was an imperfect solution. With more than half the world not participating, the treaty cannot avert the environmental catastrophe that Gore has predicted for 30 years. And as a political matter, the U.S. Senate will not approve even the constructive provisions of the treaty without the developing world.
The outcome of Kyoto is, from the standpoint of the United States, is impractical and unrealistic, and it can't be achieved. And because of that, the debate's going to continue and intensify in future years.
Which is not bad news for the fossil fuel industry. More debate, more opportunity to delay action. 1997 was the hottest year on record.
I'm on an all-night flight when suddenly, terrible heartburn. The guy in the next seat says, "Here, try this, Zantac 75. Thanks, I say. You know, maybe I ought to see a doctor about this heartburn. He says, "You just did."
The medicine in Zantac 75 is the #1 doctor-prescribed acid reducer. It relieves even your toughest heartburn, controlling acid for up to 12 hours.
Thanks, doctor, wherever you are.
Zantac 75, the final word in heartburn relief.
Greetings. Having heard us describe the problems with our old communications programs, the MCI team is prepared to demonstrate solutions. On this afternoon's dance card, multi-point video conferencing that lets you meet with far-flung clients and colleagues without ever leaving your desk. The MCI team even devised a way for me to participate. The silver screen.
I asked my doctor about those new prescription diet pills. He said they're only for people who are seriously overweight, not for me. But I wanted to lose weight, so I talked to my pharmacist. He recommended Dexatrim. I lost 12 pounds, and I wasn't hungry.
Dexatrim, just one-time released caplet, works all day to help you eat less and lose weight.
The Dexatrim plan was easy. I lost 12 pounds, and I feel great.
Lose weight with Dexatrim, recommended #1 by pharmacists.
My dad told me something amazing. You can actually strengthen your teeth.
With Mentadent you can. It's proven. Fresh from the pump, only Mentadent's baking soda and peroxide activate on contact to create oxygenated bubbles. They power fluoride to tooth enamel, penetrating, making teeth stronger, healthier.
It's a wonderful taste. You can feel it working, this bubbling action in your teeth. And who doesn't want stronger teeth?
Mentadent, the toothpaste that activates on contact. Pumps strength into your teeth every time you brush.
This allergy season, catch some air like never before, because now there's Allegra. Allegra's the prescription antihistamine for people 12 and over that gives you non-drowsy relief so you can experience more. Discover the amazing freedom of Allegra. In studies, side effects were similar to a sugar pill and included drowsiness, cold or flu, nausea, and menstrual pain. To learn more, ask your doctor or call now. Allegra.
Along, singing a song, side by side.
Want lobster? How about shrimp? Have both for only $11.99. Right now at Red Lobster, shrimp and lobster are together, side by side, for one very enticing price. So grab some food before this offer ends and enjoy. 'Cause life on land is dry.
Side by side.
Monday, con artists are making millions putting phony charges on phone bills. Think it's not happening to you? How can you tell?
Did you know what it was?
No, I didn't look at it. I just paid the bill.
2020 Monday at 9, 8 Central.
The author of Jaws, Beast, and the Deep joins forces with the man who created the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park.
It's more than a shark you're dealing with. This thing's part human.
Don't expect it to stop at the water's edge.
Peter Benchley's Creature. Danger surfaces ABC May.
ABC News Saturday night continues. Once again, Peter Jennings.
As of now, the International Climate Treaty is going to be debated in the Senate this year, as of now. And so we leave you with one additional thought. More greenhouse gases are being spewed into the atmosphere than ever before, particularly from the developing world. And it takes the Earth more than 100 years to recycle every pound of carbon dioxide that man puts up there. So if the world puts off doing something until all the scientists agree, it may be too late to fix the problem. I'm Peter Jennings. Thank you for joining us. In a moment, Forrest Sawyer will be back to tell you our plans for next Saturday night. Good night.